America felt the truth of Scripture. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I truly believe that God saved President Trump's life that day. And I believe that God is with us right now and watches over this incredible nation every single day.
Were you excited when you found out that a Catholic was running for Vice President of the United States?
To be honest with you, no. I am a great defender of the separation of church and state. Someone like JD Vance can represent the Catholic Church and show that we are an intellectual powerhouse. Honestly, if any politician could actually own up to their mistakes and say, I'm sorry, I'm human and I messed up in this because I didn't have all the information or because I might have been thinking selfishly, honestly, that would be someone who I could vote for.
Welcome to One Nation Under God. You know, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not the candidates for the White House are talking enough about their faith. For a lot of people, they're used to seeing the candidate talk about their religion, about their faith in God, about what value system they ascribe to. And for us, we're watching JD Vance, the GOP candidate for the White House for vice president, talk a lot about his Catholic faith. And so in light of the fact that we have a big event coming up here at NewsNation to talk about the running mate, to learn more about him, we wanted to speak to someone in the Catholic Church about the value system, about his journey, and about what that might mean for the American people. So we're very excited to have Father Leo Patalinghug here with us on One Nation Under God. He is somebody who has a very wide resume. He is a breakdancer. He is a chef. He's competed on some of the biggest shows, actually, serving food, but also bringing people to the table together in a spirit of unity. And we're so happy to have you on, Father Leo. Welcome to One Nation Under God.
Thanks, Adrienne. It's a pleasure. That resume just makes me sound so interesting.
You are interesting. I mean, I can't break dance.
Well, again, the breakdancing was a thing in the past, but it does have to do with even just politics and the way people see people now. Because your past is going to be part of who you are today.
And do you think people, I mean, it's interesting. We live in this culture where, you know, people have been canceled for what they believe. They've been canceled for mostly the sins of the past, right? We can see that in some of the big legal cases that have come up in just the past recent months. But do you think that for political candidates, people's memory is kind of short term when it comes to mistakes or misgivings, or do we hold them to a higher standard still in 2024?
I believe that people have a very confused memory these days. I do believe that there are psychological operations that makes us want to see and hear what obviously the media tells us to believe, see, and hear. And so I do think that people are not only short-term memory, I think that their minds are inundated with 24/7 news coverage, and people are not built to process all of this stuff. Some of it is junk, some of it is true information, but people can't process all of this at one time. And when I talked about just our past, it really does help us in understanding who we are today. And so when it comes to our politicians, we know every one of them had a past. Are we afraid to talk about it in a civil but also productive way? So I don't think that our pasts should be off the table. We need to talk about it, and that includes every candidate, because none of them are saints.
No, well, none of us are saints, and nobody's perfect. But we're all, I think that most people would say that their goal is to become the best version of themselves. You've got JD Vance, who's been very public, and what you just said made me want to ask you 3 questions at once. That happens all the time here. So I'm going to try to get to all of them, but you mentioned first the media, and I know the Al Smith dinner happened. And it's a highly attended event. Presidential candidates are famous for attending and participating in a roast. The Democratic candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris, did not attend. Do you think, before we get to a lot of the JD Vance questions and why you're here, do you think that it looks bad on the Democratic Party and on Ms. Harris for not showing up to this highly Catholic event?
I actually talk about this on the Father Leo Show, my podcast, because I'm the guy who wants to use food to bring people together. And Al Smith, obviously politician and philanthropic historical figure in New York City and around the world, wanted to host a dinner where people can come together, they can take jabs at each other, but to show that they're human. And even though we disagree, can we at least eat together? It's hosted by the Cardinal Archbishop of New York, and it saddened me terribly. And so I talked about it. I got criticized, online, saying, how dare you criticize her for not showing up at this dinner? She only had a short time to actually campaign. And my thought is, this is one of the greatest campaign efforts you can make, because it shows, number one, you're human. Number two, you have a sense of humor. Number three, you can actually rise above your own differences and say that even though I don't like you, I can eat with you. And so honestly, one of my greatest desires is to cook for that Al Smith dinner, because I want to cook food that is so good that people will just shut the faith up and eat. And when they do, they can actually listen to each other, because truth is hysterical. I mean, I watched both the SNL produced skit that Ms. Harris put out and the entirety of Donald Trump's presentation, and you can see the difference in the campaigns. One's trying to be human and the other is very scripted.
I think about what you said about the media, and I'm thinking about the difference in the campaigns. You're saying one is very humanized in your opinion, and one is very scripted and produced. For people of the Catholic faith, are they going through all of this, whether the media is a replay of these clips from Saturday Night Live producers to the Al Smith dinner being posted on social media platforms like X, to flipping through their news networks and news channels? Or are Catholics more saying, filter all that out? At the end of the day, what does my heart say? What is resonating in my spirit? What does my God say? What does my priest say about how I should value the times we're in? What are Catholics thinking?
Unfortunately, I can't get into the minds of every Catholic, because we are just part of every other demographic. And unfortunately, secularism has creeped very much into the Catholic Church. And so the Pew Research shows that only 30% actually consider themselves Catholic, even if they were raised Catholic, which means they might go to church on Christmas and Easter. And only 30% of that actually go to church regularly. And only 30% of that actually really know their Catholic faith well. And so, unfortunately, the Catholic Church has had just as much of a problem trying to get the truth out as Jesus did. And it required him to actually die, and to have apostles who are willing to die for their faith and what they believe in order to actually get that message across. And so it requires Catholics to be willing to experience martyrdom. And when I say that word, I'm saying it in its original Greek, which means witness, but also in the understanding of how it's understood sociologically, that people, unfortunately, are going to have to be sacrificed for what they believe. And we see that happening now. And so we need good witnesses, good, effective witnesses to say, this is what the Catholics believe. It should never influence who you vote for, but it should tell you how to discern for yourself, based on your own good conscience, what's well formed, on what's the best, who is the best candidate that's going to represent my personal values, and hopefully your personal values are aligned with your Catholic faith.
When you say sacrifice, people are going to have to be sacrificed. That sounds very violent. I know that in leadership, sacrifice is a key tenet of leadership. Sacrifice is key to when you want to achieve any goal. I mean, even if you're just talking about going to the gym, I got to sacrifice time and the fact that I want to eat a whole plate of ice cream, or a dish of ice cream, instead of, going and working out and making my body suffer. What are you talking about when it's about sacrifice and modern day martyrdom?
So a lot of that. It requires people who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for what they believe. We call them heroes, right? I mean, the heroes that have died to preserve this country's freedoms, to provide, to protect our nation's rights. And all of those things are part and parcel of what it means to be a public servant. The second understanding means that we've got to work hard. The sacrifice of people to actually work hard and not just simply talk a good talk, but actually put up, shut up, and do the work. I see too many politicians who aren't willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of their people. They make all these laws, but they break it themselves. I mean, how many public servants have become just incredibly wealthy, and yet we need to take them seriously as being one with us? No, give away that money. Don't make money. I'm at least impressed that some politicians aren't willing to take their entire salary and they donate the rest. I think that's a form of a sacrifice. But I also think that the sacrifice and this idea of being a witness and a martyrdom means that we just have to actually do what we say we're going to do. And we say what we believe. When I became ordained, I put my hands in the bishop's hands, and he kind of encouraged me to preach what I believe and practice what I preach. That's what it means to be a witness. That's what it means to be a martyr, to be willing to be canceled. We literally had people be put in prison just because they stood up for their Catholic faith and their desire to protect human life from the atrocities of abortion. They are being sacrificed right before our eyes. Unfortunately, we get no play in the media for these heroes that are literally suffering in prison because they stood up for what they believed in. And They weren't violent. They didn't burn down a building. They prayed in front of an abortion clinic.
That's putting things in perspective, and I don't think a lot of people are really cognizant when you put it in that light. In terms of JD Vance, who's been very, very public about who he believes in God, he believes in the Catholic Church, but he had a journey to that place. He was raised in the Protestant faith. At one point, he considered himself an atheist. He became an intellectual, perhaps on a journey of disassociating himself from his Appalachian roots and trying to find the meaning of life after the passing of his grandmother, who was a huge part of his upbringing and his identity and culture. But then he found out that he could join the Catholic Church, and that he didn't have to give up that search for wisdom, for literature, for this intelligentsia that he had actually exposed himself to with his education and university learning. When Catholics think about JD Vance, do they expect him to represent the church that they belong to, the parish that they belong to? Is there this pressure that JD now faces, or Senator Vance, I should not call him by his first name, faces as a result of being so public?
Again, unfortunately, he could never represent what every person in the pews believe. His job is to be true to himself, number one, but also stand before God, who hopefully he not only is learning about, but also loving. Remember, God is personal. We are called to love God with all our hearts, minds, and souls, and to know that God loves us as if we were the only person in this world. And so when we look at Senator Vance, we look at him as, for me, a real model of what the typical person who makes this journey to become Catholic, what they go through. Because, as the famous Fulton Sheen says, I can find a lot of people who hate the Catholic Church, but they don't know what the Catholic Church is. But I can't find actually a lot of people who know the Catholic Church and hate the church. It's what people don't know. And unfortunately, we've gotten some bad press because of, honestly, the evils and the sins of a few of our own. You can't judge the whole by that few, but they do. And so Senator Vance really shows a very typical development in not only understanding that the Catholic Church isn't evil, but the Catholic Church is actually a custodian of truth, goodness, and true power, which is never to be abused, but used as service to others. Christ himself will say, if you want to be great, then be a servant to all. And so, that's kind of the reason why I put on an apron and serve people my food because I want to make sure people know that I'm not here just to be served. I'm here to serve. And the journey that he endured, and it always comes when you actually start to question life, right? That's what he did when he lost his grandmother, and it really obviously affected him. You start to question life. There's got to be more. There's got to be more than what this world or any politician can promise falsely, because no politician can play God, although they try very hard. What Senator Vance experienced was humility, but also I think he has a gift with just the intellectual world. He's incredibly smart. He's a critical thinker. And because of that critical thinking, he started to go deeply into world religions. And what he appreciated, I think he was quoted as saying, I just like the fact that it's really old. You know, I mean, the Catholic Church, we're not making it up as we go along. We are rooted in a tradition. We're rooted in a history. And with the learning process, he's come to just realize I can either assent to this truth that has made saints in the world, that has changed this world for the better, or I just think that the Catholic Church is just a flawed organization run by a bunch of mean old men, which it isn't. It's hardly that. We're all over the world, and we've done really good things, and he is just taking it seriously.
Were you excited when you found out that a Catholic was running for vice president of the United States?
To be honest with you, no, because I honestly, I studied before the breakdancing and before the cooking and even before priesthood. I actually studied politics, and I am a great defender of the separation of church and state. I know they must be separated, but it doesn't mean they have to be divorced. They still have to talk with each other in the same way. Parents who may be separated from each other, they still have to talk for the good of their children. So church and politics still have to talk for the good of the people they are called to serve. And so to me, I don't care what religion a person is, honestly. I'm grateful that he has represented the Catholic Church well. That's what I'm excited about, that he's sticking to the morals of the church, that he is continuing to learn, that he's representing it well, and that he's not ashamed of it.
And when you come to a table, let's just imagine you're serving food with JD Vance, former President Trump, then you have members of the Democratic Party on the other side, Vice President Harris, President Biden, and other leaders who are instrumental and impactful in the direction that the United States is going through. What benefit do you think there is to having a Catholic represented at that table?
I think that's a fantastic question. It shows that, number one, that the Catholic Church has and always will be a part of a healthy society. I lead tours around the world, and I show them this is what the Catholic Church built. It built all these magnificent monuments, structures, infrastructure, procedures, laws, schools, hospitals. They've done so much good. To disregard the largest religion in the world that has done good, we're sadly competing against another religion that I don't know if they can say that they've done as much good. I mean, I'm saying that as politically correct as possible. If we were to take a look at the major world religions, what religion has done what the Catholic Church has done? This is what I think JD Vance can bring to the table. Not just the historicity, but also the mandate to be humble, to be selfless, to be a servant, to work for the common good, for justice, for true love. Because we know that love isn't just love. Love is a decision and a sacrifice. But I also am grateful that someone like JD Vance can represent the Catholic Church and show that we are an intellectual powerhouse. We are known for having some of the smartest people in the world, including people who have even just named, for example, and thought up of the Big Bang Theory. People forget it was a Catholic priest, Father Georges Lemaitre, who actually coined that phrase of him. Even Einstein would say he's one of the smartest people in the world. We have to bring back intellectual honesty and a true critical thinking discernment back to these conversations, because unfortunately everyone is voting by their feelings, and their feelings are pretty messed up these days.
Well, feelings, I always say, can lie to you. And a lot of times we need to be rooted in something that overrides our feelings so that we don't make a decision we regret. But a lot of people would say the Catholic Church has seen its roughest days. I mean, in spite of lots of media, as you mentioned, bad press in the ills or the people who are the bad apples, the people you call the few, there have been a reduction of attendance in Catholic churches, especially since the pandemic. There have been the closing of so many parishes all around the United States, the consolidation of the church. And for many Catholics, like you mentioned, they could identify as Catholic because of their culture, their mama, their grandmama, their granddaddy was Catholic, but they're kind of a la carte. They come on Christmas out of obligation. They come on Easter out of obligation. Does being Catholic mean the same thing today as it did in previous generations?
No, and it's going to always be an evolving understanding because we as humans change, societies change. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because I'm one of these priests that's not afraid to talk about the scandals of the church. It's horrific and it's evil. And I'm grateful that the Catholic Church is taking it so seriously that they're not only vetting any seminarian and any church employee like very intensely, we've actually cooperated with not only allowing investigations in order for these criminal acts to be prosecuted, we actually are providing this support financially to those who have been scarred by this abuse. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every stinking institution that has a history of pedophilia do the same? Wouldn't it be wonderful if Hollywood would do the same? Wouldn't it be wonderful if every school does the same? If every police force, every coach, and guess what? Every politician. Wouldn't it be wonderful if those same standards that the Catholic Church is using would be used in every one of these institutions? But alas, that doesn't happen. So I also want to just challenge people when they want to just simply say, you know, I'll say something and people immediately shoot online and say, yeah, but you're just probably one of those people that protects pedophilias. This couldn't be the dumbest ad hominem style attack ever, because according to my religion, we actually speak out against these sins. Sadly, it's the Hollywood world, it's the popular culture that speaks in support of these evils. And yet, you know, who did these priests follow? Did they follow the teachings of Jesus? Clearly not. They were following the ways of a broken world. And that's what's led to the sad history of pedophilia in the Catholic Church. And yet, despite all of that, I take firm comfort and consolation that Christ says that he will never abandon his church. And while the numbers may be, in a sense, reducing, I liken it to a plant. This is almost as if God just simply pruning off the dead branches in order to hopefully bear more quality, better fruit.
There's a new discussion that isn't a new topic, but it's transgenderism. And it is inside the church now. It is in politics now. I was watching JD Vance at a mom's event. It was kind of a mom roundtable where he answered questions. And one woman talked about how she was very concerned about her children's school. She mentioned a school district in California they're suing the state of California for some of the gender ideology that has been allowed in classes. Do you think that JD Vance is properly representing the values of the church and that he should when it comes to this political hot button?
I do believe that if anyone takes raising children, which means not only educating them, but providing good conscience formation, you know, that's just not giving them information, but teaching them how to digest it. They should never allow gender conversations at a young age. It should only come at a certain point when sexuality becomes more of a question for them. And so I think that no matter what a politician believes, we have to take the education of children seriously enough that we know of their impressionable ages, they don't know how to hate unless we teach them. They don't understand the complexities of sexual dysphoria and confusion. They just know that they want to be hugged and loved, and that we've got to be able to protect that. And so I think that whatever JD Vance says, and I'll be very honest, I haven't read as much on what he wants to actually do, but I would hope that we would take education seriously enough that we would respect the ages of formation, that we would have to let people know that families need to be equipped with good information to talk to their children about the birds and the bees and all things sexual, and that it can be aided by good scientific age appropriate discussions that are going to be in a limited and very respected way. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is this like an onslaught. It's like a tsunami of gender affirming confusion, really, even at the youngest age. So I just know that we are a broken world. We are all broken. And we have to care for people in a tender, more compassionate way. That doesn't mean giving in to everything that they say is reality, because it might not be reality. We just have to be more loving and caring, but in an age appropriate way.
And that conversation is something that I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about. I think a lot of people are even afraid to talk about immigration and secure borders. And so for a lot of the Catholic Church, and I've talked to some folks in the community, there has been an increase in the number of people coming from Mexico and South and Central American countries, Spanish speakers. There have had to be imports of priests to be able to speak the languages at a number of Catholic churches in America just to serve the audience of people who attend Mass. What is your stance on that?
I do believe that migration to a better experience, a better world, a better future is a right. I firmly believe that. And why? Because I'm a product of immigration. But I waited over 12 years in order to even get a green card. So I am completely against what we have been seeing of recent times with this onslaught of illegal immigrant activity. I also am a world traveler. I just got back from Ireland a few days ago. Before that, it was Italy. And so I'm traveling all over the place. Everywhere I go, I've got to show my credentials. I just can't go into any place. So I have to be someone who respects the laws of a sovereign nation. And I find that some of the illegal activity doesn't respect America. And I also have lived in other countries, have got to do my best to integrate into the culture. So I lived in Italy for 6 years. I had to learn Italian, and I had to respect their culture. And why? Because I am there. They don't have to cater to me. So I do think that there is a real need for an honest conversation to hold both the hosting country and the person who wants to come into that country a real honest conversation. And I'm finding that most immigrants really do support laws, boundaries, borders. They want to become a part of this country, and that they learn the language and they become incredibly successful learning the American dream. And those who come in without documentation, they might not come with nefarious attitudes, but they come illegally. I find them sometimes insulating themselves and creating the country that they left in this country now. And I don't think that that's helpful to us, and it is certainly not helpful to them.
Do you think that most people who've immigrated here, like yourself and maybe members of your family, and paid a higher price or made more sacrifices in that process, do you identify more with being Catholic or more being an immigrant?
Well, I think it's both and. I think a good Catholic answer is both and. You know, the Mexican people are, high percentage of them are Catholic. And it's because of that they want a better life for themselves, and that they are also immigrants. They know that they are different. But hopefully what comes to the forefront is that I'm a human being, and that if they want to live in America, that they're an American. So I see myself as an American who is Filipino in descent. I am Roman Catholic. I identify as those things, and I'm not confused in that identity. But I also know that one doesn't overtake the other. It has to work in an integrated whole. And that's what makes someone not only holistic, but I also think it gives them a healthy attitude.
And when you have identity, it impacts how you influence people. So back to a JD Vance question, what should be his top tier of identity as somebody helping to potentially, if he's elected along with President Trump, change the direction of the country? Should it be Catholic first?
Well, that's the beauty of what it means to be Catholic. The word Catholic sometimes is interpreted from a Latin understanding as universal, all encompassing. In the Greek understanding, because it is a Greek word, it literally means a fullness of spirit, a fullness of truth. So I would never want JD Vance to live a compartmentalized life. No one should. His Catholic identity should be a part of his humanitarian efforts. It should be part of his intellectual capability. It should be part of his social efforts to help those in need. It should be part of his international policies. It's a part of who you are, and you can't take that away from yourself. And if you do, you see people who live literally a divided life, a bipolarity. I'm this way in front of this person. I'm this way in front of that group of people. And I see that too often in politicians. They're no longer authentic.
It's interesting because I think that there's pressure at that level that I don't think any of us can put our feet into the shoes of. At the same time, I wonder, do you think be the number one benefit to JD Vance being Catholic in this day and this hour?
Number one, that he knows that God is with him, no matter what. When he receives Holy Communion, he knows that God is with him. He also has the benefit of the millions of heroes who were witnesses, martyrs for their faith, praying for him. So he's not alone. He not only has God with him, he has an army of saints with him as well. And then he also has the availability of the sacrament, especially reconciliation, that when he messes up, and he will because he's human, he can ask forgiveness of God, church, and one another. He should never be above being able to ask forgiveness to people who he's harmed. Honestly, if any politician could actually own up to their mistakes and say, I'm sorry, I'm human and I messed up in this because I didn't have all the information or because I might have been thinking selfishly. Honestly, that would be someone who I could vote for and be honestly celebratory because of that human, humble, servant-like attitude.
Yeah, you don't see very many politicians apologize when there's even proof that they messed up. That would be something. I hope that would make news here in NewsNation and around the world. A couple more questions for you. One is in terms of values. I think a lot of people think of, and you mentioned earlier, separation of church and state, how, just leave God out of it. But as a person of faith, how you apply your faith to every single belief system and every single value, and that the two can't be separated, because I think people think that somehow you can leave your faith at the door.
Yeah, some people do. Again, they think that separation of church and state means it's just a bad understanding of separation of church and state. It's what I would call such an immature approach to understanding the Constitution and America's history. I think if someone were to be influenced by faith, and so many of our good politicians are, that they can take the tenets of their faith and they can see others with dignity, made in God's image and likeness, treat them with respect they deserve, not be afraid to challenge them with the truth. Yet, despite the differences, have an ability to have fellowship and share something that they have in common. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I cook. I mean, a lot of people may not know this from your audiences, but I mean, I'm a professional chef. I have a food truck. I have a restaurant. I serve amazing food. I beat Bobby Flay in a throwdown competition years back. And all of that was just to tell everybody, no matter what our differences are, we all still have to eat. And if we can learn to eat together, then maybe we can go to heaven. Because if you go to heaven and you're sitting next to someone who's a Democrat or Republican that you don't like, then you might not enjoy that eternal banquet. And that is actually hell for you. Mm-hmm. So I think what we have to do is practice eating with one another so that we can treat each other with respect. And you know what that is? That's 100% Catholic. For the first time in history, we have one of the most extreme candidates with an extreme vice president candidate, and they don't really represent America's values. They really don't. But we don't actually know what all their values are, because in that form of extremism, they like to only say so much to make their positions attractive, but they keep the truth to themselves, so that they keep their version of the truth to themselves. So extremism is truly cultish, and I see it on every side of the coin. But I've never seen candidates so extreme from this particular Democrat Party. I mean, it does make me a little nervous with the extreme positions that they take that really can make us change who we are as Americans. We become kind of a very fractured society now.
But when you talk about the Democratic Party being extremists, aren't a lot of Catholics Democrat?
Oh, yeah. By nature, yeah, the JFK Democrat for sure. Because at one point, the Democrat were the poorer people. They were seen as humble. Now, I know that the history of Democrats with slavery, I get all that. Again, I study the politicians, but it's in the social evolution of the way parties are understood. A lot of the Democrats, a lot of the Catholics identified as Democrat because of the social promotional support that they gave to immigrants, for example. So they were very good at welcoming immigrants, and some Italian coming off the boat, or some Irish person coming off the boat. They didn't understand who was who. They just like, who gave me food? Even in the even in the Philippines.
They remember the food. That's what you talk about, Father Leo.
Yeah, I mean, like in the Philippines, my dad, who was Catholic, but he identified as Protestant because they gave him candy. And so it's whoever supported you, and that kind of becomes the tradition. That's where I'm saying JD Vance is providing a critical thinking and hopefully giving people a chance to discern how do they identify. Because again, he was Protestant, he considered himself atheist, and now he's Catholic. In order for you to become Catholic, you actually have to take a lot of classes in order to become Catholic. I mean, we just don't take anyone for the sake of anybody. We want to make sure that they can articulate to some degree what they want to become. And I always say this, that converts make the best Catholics.
Converts make the best Catholics. Why? Because they're willing to pay the price, because they're older versus when they're a little child and have to do their first communion?
I think it's because they don't take it for granted. They have actually studied it, and it's a decision that they make with fuller knowledge and fuller recognition that this is who they want to become. Again, it's no different, like when a little child says, I want to be a boy and I want to be a girl. Do you take it seriously? But maybe if they're older, do you take it seriously? Because they have to make that real investment. They have to make that sacrifice. They have to, in a sense, die to them old selves in order to live a new life. And that's why the baptismal ritual as an adult is they're dying to themselves and they're coming out of those waters as a new person in Christ.
So how long does it take to become a Catholic? Like how long would it take JD Vance as a grown-up out of college to become a Catholic?
So depending on the programs in the churches, some of them last from 6 months to a full year. Mm-hmm. And so it really is quite a commitment of study, of prayer, of community building, of developing your own spiritual life, of getting more involved in the church community. And just like every other student, some take it more seriously than the others. I mean, that's just a given. Some might become Catholic because they want to get married to their future spouse who is Catholic. And yet it's still a decision that they are making as an adult. Mm-hmm. I think in JD Vance's case, he did it because of, again, the intellectual honesty, the historical reality. And thirdly, because I think he takes Jesus Christ seriously. Most importantly, he takes Jesus Christ very seriously with all his mind, heart, and soul.
And do you think a lot of Catholics that you've talked to, I know you can't speak to the entire, Catholic population, have they been a little critical because they don't know if his wife is Catholic, or it's been reported that she's not Catholic, or there's confusion about whether she's Catholic?
No, I think people know that for the most part that JD Vance takes his faith seriously, even though his wife, I believe, is Hindu, and it's not even Christian. But she's also not. She's also very intelligent. She's a pretty smart woman herself, and she knows that a relationship, a marriage, at least a secular or at least public covenant with one another, is a form of religion. The word religion comes from religere, which means to be bound together. There has to be a spirit that brings them together. And so even though JD Vance is Catholic and she's not, they can still have a religious marriage in quotation marks, because they know what binds them together is love. And love is spiritual. And that's why I think she respects JD Vance's decision to become Catholic, because his spirit is really something that she has fallen in love with. It's a beautiful thing, actually.
You don't hear that from every priest and you don't hear that from every church, but I wanted to get your personal interpretation of it. So do you think that a lot of Catholics watching, again, anecdotally, what you're hearing from your friends, from those in your local community, are they more inclined to vote for the Trump-Vance ticket, even though it's Republican, if they've had a history of being Democrat because of the extreme views of the Democratic candidates?
I do think that when the Holy Father, in an off-the-cuff comment, said, these are two people, none of them are really the best candidates, you vote for the lesser of two evils. That's what he said. I think that when you take a look at the vice presidential picks, that I think Catholics can be affirmed and encouraged, knowing that should, God forbid, anything happen to President Trump, if he is elected, that they're going to have someone who is going to represent the rule of law, that he's going to be a morally just man, that he is also someone who can speak and articulate thoughts well. I mean, I think the debate between the two vice presidential candidates was clear. They can take comfort knowing that someone like JD Vance is supporting his presidential candidate.
Okay, so soft prediction. Do you think that we'll be surprised at the number of Catholics who actually switch to the Republican ticket as a result of their desire to not have an extreme candidate, in your opinion?
I don't know. I mean, I wish I could, because, man, I would be just paid a lot of money as a political punster and kind of a reviewer of politics and polls. But I am going to be producing my own podcast, and it's going to be a Catholic response to Kamala voters, because I think that people aren't looking at her positions with a Catholic viewpoint. And it's not just about abortion. It's not just about abortion, although her record on that is heinous to Catholicism. It's just heinous. But it's all the other things that she has done that don't necessarily align with Catholic beliefs. And so I'm hoping that when we start looking at things, not in a criticism fashion, but with discernment and looking at point by point, that I hope Catholics will live up to their calling to be intellectually honest, to be rigorous in the formation of their own conscience, and that they will form their conscience with facts, not base it on feelings, and vote accordingly.
Can you give me just maybe 2 or 3 of those points and maybe show how you believe that vice presidential GOP candidate JD Vance would actually ascribe to that Catholic viewpoint?
Yes, we've actually talked about it in some regards. One, again, is abortion, which is a moral topic, but it's also a scientific, biological, and psychological topic. We don't want to have unfettered access to abortion, because it changes the minds of people and makes people think that abortions will solve all problems. And let's just be honest. Since abortion has been legalized, we have created more problems with crimes against human dignity. That's just a sociological fact. Secondly, I think the immigration is a big issue. While we want to be compassionate to people who are coming into the country, I don't think that the migrants now are being treated with compassion. even by states and cities that claim to be sanctuaries. They are not being respected. They are not being treated fairly, because I think a sanctuary city has to admit, we don't have those resources. So why do you claim to be one if you can't actually be one? There's dishonesty there. Mm-hmm. Thirdly, I think on a world agenda, I think that the way we've approached kind of geopolitics has been a strange one where we think that let's just say that there's one party that thinks that America has to meddle in everyone else's affairs. I think that is an unhealthy approach. The Catholic Church never wants to meddle in everyone's affairs. They want citizens to have dignity. That's what Americans' geopolitics should be doing, caring for people, not trying to form governments. Let's just admit that we have had more major world wars and crises and violence just across the border in the past 3.5 years than when Trump was in office. I've got to take a look at those facts seriously. And why is that? Well, because America didn't want to get too involved in their issues. We know we've got to be strong as a nation, because if America is healthy, I think the world stage is healthier. What one party has done has not been actually helpful to Catholics. I mean, even weaponizing the Department of Justice against Christian organizations. When we have Vice President Harris accusing the Knights of Columbus, an incredible group of Catholic men, calling them an extreme group, and then accusing Justice Kavanaugh of being inappropriate with women because they say we've got to believe all victims, yet we know that there are allegations against her running mate. Do we believe those victims as well? You see, there's hypocrisy on every side, but I'm seeing it more from one side because of a lack of critical thinking.
I know you spoke at the National Eucharistic Congress held in Indiana this year, and thousands upon thousands of Catholics coming together, some making a pilgrimage even to attend. And I think that a lot of people, I recently saw just this past weekend, a big event for women marching on the Capitol, many of them praying for the country and praying about protection of the unborn. Do you think, in your mind as a Catholic and as someone connected to this community, we are seeing revival?
I would hope so. I think that it needs to be a visible sign. Just recently in New York City, they had a Eucharistic procession, stop traffic. I'm sure it ticked everybody off in Manhattan because they were wondering, what the heck are all these nuns and priests and holy people walking around praying in front of the host, which is, we believe, the body and blood of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. And so these things are happening around the country and around the world. And it's okay to do that because we do have that right here in America. Free expression of self, including religion. And we have to not only protect it, we have to celebrate it. And I think that you can only celebrate something if you actually see it. So I'm grateful that there are bigger movements and more national visuals of Catholicism. And why? Because it's a good thing. We have our flaws, but we have done more good than any other historical institution in the world. And so thank God for Catholicism. Thank God for Catholic politicians who take their faith seriously, not just in name, but in action. And no matter who the politician or president is, Catholics will always be praying for them. It's our requirement. We have to pray for our civic leaders at every Mass.
Father Leo, I have so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for coming on One Nation Under God.
It is a pleasure. I see I do more than just cook.
Yeah, but now I'm hungry, so I might have to get you. Might have to have you serve us a meal one day.
Just be hungry for good things and just let me know when and where. I will bring my apron.
Okay, and I'll do the dishes. Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.